August 17th, 1944, northern France. The battle is over. Smoke still hangs in the air. On a quiet roadside, German soldiers find an American truck, a GMC CCKW, left behind with its engine still warm. They expect to find secrets or treasures inside. Instead, they find something far more shocking. A simple machine that could outwork an entire army. Every bolt, every label, every part tells a story. It's not built to impress. It's built to win. And as these soldiers open its toolbox, they realize the truth. The real difference between two nations wasn't set in courage. It was in how they built their machines. What they discovered that day would change the way they saw America, and even the future of Germany itself. Watch till the end to see how one simple truck changed the course of history. If you love true World War II stories told with real emotion, please subscribe, like, and support this channel, so we can keep bringing history back to life. August 17th, 1944. Northern France. The war was breaking apart. On a narrow country road near Falaise, a group of German mechanics found something strange, an American truck, still smoking from use, left behind in a hurry. Its tires were muddy, the paint scratched, but the big white star on the door was clear. The men gathered around it, eyes wide. One of them muttered, "A gift from the enemy." They thought they had found a simple truck, but what they saw when they looked closer made their stomachs sink. The canvas cover smelled of oil and wet cloth. Inside were boxes of tools, each neatly arranged. The bolts and screws were labeled with numbers and letters. Even the manuals were written in clear diagrams anyone could follow. To the German soldiers, used to complex machines and hard-to-find parts, it felt like opening a door into another world. One mechanic, Feldwebel Hans Kruger, later wrote in his diary, "We thought our machines were better, but this truck, it was built like it wanted to be fixed, not admired." They opened the hood. The six-cylinder engine purred even after days in the rain. The fuel lines were clean. The parts could be swapped out in minutes, all the same size, all marked with clear serials. They were shocked by how easy it was to understand. Back home, German engineers made vehicles that needed master mechanics. Here, the Americans had built something any soldier could fix in the field. The men ran their hands along the metal frame. The smell of gasoline mixed with mud and grass. A crow called in the distance. The front lines were not far away, but for a moment the war stopped, replaced by quiet awe. One soldier laughed nervously. "No wonder they have so many," he said. "We build one masterpiece, they build 1,000 machines." It was true. By 1944, the United States had produced over 800,000 GMC CCKW trucks, the famous Deuce and a Half. Germany, in the same period, had managed fewer than 100,000 medium trucks of all types, each made in smaller numbers, with different parts by different companies. The Germans had come to take trophies. Instead, they found proof that their system could not keep up. They had been trained to think of war as skill and precision, but here, victory looked like mass production and simplicity. Kruger later said, "This truck was more dangerous than a tank. It carried the power to never stop." As the sun went down, the men pushed the truck toward their own lines, hoping to study it more closely. They didn't yet know that what they saw in that moment, the quiet power of American industry, was already deciding the war. The smell of oil stayed on their hands. The hum of that captured engine followed them long after. But this was only the beginning. When the captured truck reached the German repair station, the mechanics gathered around it like students around a teacher. They laid out their tools, wiped their hands, and began taking it apart, slowly, carefully. Every piece they removed told a story. The engine came out first. It was a 270 cubic inch GMC straight six, simple but strong. The men expected complicated wiring and hidden parts, like in German vehicles. Instead, they found an engine that almost invited them to work on it. Each part fit perfectly. Each bolt was easy to reach. The parts were stamped with numbers showing where they belonged. Unteroffizier Müller, one of the mechanics, said in surprise, "Even the smallest screw has a code. Its Seidler truck was made for anyone to fix it, not just engineers. The smell of hot oil and old fuel filled the air. The metal was warm to the touch, even after hours in the open. They noticed how light the engine parts were. Aluminum and steel instead of the heavier metals Germany used. The air filter was simple and could be cleaned in minutes. The radiator came off with only 4 bolts. There was no wasted design, no artistic curves, just function. To the Germans, who built trucks like handcrafted watches, this was almost insulting, but they could not deny the brilliance behind it. American engineers had designed the GMC to be mass-produced, fast to repair, and easy to drive. It didn't need a skilled mechanic to survive. It only needed fuel, basic tools, and time. The manuals inside the cab amazed them even more. Printed in waterproof ink with clear pictures, they showed every step of repair. Müller turned the pages slowly. "They think like soldiers," he said, "not like engineers." In that moment, they realized the biggest difference between the two sides wasn't just the number of machines, it was the way they thought. Germany believed in perfection. America believed in practicality. One built beauty, the other built endurance. By 1944, US factories could make one GMC truck every 7 minutes. In Detroit, St. Louis, and Pontiac, assembly lines moved day and night. Women, students, and even retired men worked on them. Each truck shared the same design, so any part from one could fit another. Meanwhile, German factories were bombed, short of materials, and still using older methods that required expert hands. As the Germans studied the truck, they noticed something else. The tires, fuel filters, even the seats were made by different companies, all using the same pattern. It meant America wasn't one factory fighting the war. It was a whole nation turned into one giant workshop. Kruger whispered, almost to himself, "If they can make thousands of these without stopping, how can we ever catch up?" The men stood silently, listening to the distant thunder of artillery. The truth was sinking in. Every shell, every tank, every truck rolling toward them came from the same unstoppable system. They had opened the truck to learn its secrets. Instead, they had learned their fate. And yet, they still wanted proof. Proof that this simple machine could really outperform their own. So they fueled it, fixed a tire, and decided to test it on the open road. What they saw next would destroy the last of their illusions. The next morning, the German mechanics started writing down what they had learned. They wanted to compare the American truck to their own, the Opel Blitz, the main transport vehicle of the Wehrmacht. The numbers quickly told a story they didn't want to believe. The Opel Blitz could carry about 3 tons of supplies. The GMC CCKW, the American Deuce and a half, could carry 2.5 tons on paper, but in real life, it often carried over 4 tons without trouble. The American truck was heavier, yes, but it had stronger axles, better suspension, and a smarter braking system. They looked at the engine again. The Blitz had a 3.6-liter engine with 75 horsepower. The GMC had over 90 horsepower, and it ran smoother even after days in the field. Kruger shook his head. "They call this a supply truck," he said. "We would call it a miracle." But the real shock came when they compared production numbers. Between 1940 and 1945, Germany built around 345,000 trucks total, in dozens of different models, each needing unique parts and tools. In the same time, America built over 2 million trucks, most of them identical or close enough to share parts. The Germans realized something important. The Americans didn't just make better trucks, they made more of everything. Tanks, planes, ships, food, clothing. It wasn't just a military difference, it was an industrial revolution on wheels. Müller looked at the data and laughed sadly. "We're start fighting an army," he said, "but their factories are the real enemy." They studied the truck's dashboard, simple gauges, wide pedals, a seat that could adjust for any driver. Even the windshield could be folded down to make transport easier. Every small detail had a purpose. When they opened the fuel cap, they found another surprise. The engine could run on different grades of gasoline, not just the pure high-octane fuel Germany needed. That meant the Americans could fuel up anywhere and keep going. In Germany, every vehicle type needed its own special parts, oils, and tools. It slowed everything down. Soldiers often waited weeks for one spare part, but with trucks like the GMC, the US Army could fix and move in hours. The numbers didn't just fail to add up, they exposed a deep truth. Germany had built a war for skill and precision. America had built a war for movement and time. One report from a captured German officer in 1944 put it simply, "We have the better soldiers, but they have the better system." The men sat around the truck as evening came. Smoke from a distant village drifted over the road. The sound of trucks, American trucks, echoed faintly from the west. The front was moving again, and faster than ever. Kruger closed his notebook. "This," he said quietly, tapping the GMC Sep's metal door, "is the sound of defeat, not from guns but from factories." They decided to take the truck out for a test, to see if its numbers matched its promise. What they discovered on the road would end any doubt left in their minds. Late in the afternoon, the German mechanics fueled up the captured GMC. The sky was cloudy, the road muddy from last night's rain. Kruger sat behind the wheel, a cigarette between his lips, his boots covered in grease. "Let's see what this American machine can really do," he said. He turned the key, and the engine started instantly, smooth and deep. No choking, no coughing smoke like their old Blitz trucks. The sound was steady, confident. The others climbed into the back with tools and boxes, ready to test it under real field conditions. They drove down a rough dirt road, the kind that usually broke axles and shook every bone in your body. But the GMC rolled forward like it was made for it. The suspension, those big curved springs, absorbed every bump. Inside, they could still talk without shouting. Müller grinned. "It feels like flying low," he said. They pushed harder, through mud, over stones, across small streams. The tires gripped like claws, and the truck kept going. No matter how rough the terrain, the Germans had never driven anything like it. The four-wheel drive pulled them through places even half-tracks sometimes struggled with. When they reached a hill, Kruger shifted gears. The transmission clicked cleanly into place. The truck climbed without hesitation, carrying nearly 4 tons of load. They all stared at the dashboard. The temperature gauge stayed cool. The oil pressure stayed perfect. By the time they stopped, the sun was setting behind the trees. The air smelled of diesel and damp grass. A soft steam rose from the engine, not from overheating, but from strength. "This truck," Kruger said quietly, "was made to move armies, not just supplies." They unloaded the boxes and checked for damage. None. Not a bolt loose, not a spring bent. One of the men kicked the tire in disbelief. "We drive one of these," he said, "and we never stop." And that was exactly the point. The GMC wasn't built to impress engineers. It was built to keep soldiers moving, no matter where they were. In war, that meant everything. Across Europe, the US Army used these trucks to carry food, ammunition, fuel, and even wounded men. Some had machine guns on top. Others carried pontoon bridges or radio equipment. They were the invisible heartbeat of the Allied advance. By 1944, American trucks were moving 90% of all supplies across Europe. In comparison, German divisions were still using over 600,000 horses for transport. The difference was more than technology, it was time. The Allies could move 1 ton of goods 300 kilometers in a day. The Germans often took a week. When Kruger wrote his report, he ended it with one simple line: "Every kilometer this truck travels is one less for Germany." That night, as the men cleaned their tools and rested beside the truck, they no longer spoke proudly of German design. They sat quietly, knowing they had touched something greater, a symbol of an industrial power that didn't need glory to win. The test drive had given them proof. The GMC wasn't just a machine, it was a message. And soon that message would thunder across Europe, in endless convoys that no army could stop. A few days later, Kruger's unit moved again, this time with both German and captured American trucks. They were heading east, toward the shrinking front. Along the way, they passed long lines of German wagons pulled by tired horses. The contrast was painful to watch. The air smelled of sweat, hay, and diesel, two worlds meeting on the same road. On one side, wooden carts creaked and groaned. On the other, engines rumbled with power. Kruger looked out the window and sighed. "It's like the past and the future marching together," he said. At the start of the war, Germany still depended on horses for almost 3/4 of its transport. Horses pulled cannons, food wagons, fuel barrels, even soldiers. Each division needed around 6,000 horses, which also meant tons of hay, oats, and care. It was a slow, fragile system. If the animals got sick or tired, the army stopped. In 1944, the United States had gone the opposite way. The US Army used more than 2 million trucks and fewer than 50,000 horses. The GMC Deuce and a half was everywhere, from North Africa to Italy to France. The Germans had once laughed at this idea. They believed machines couldn't handle the mud, snow, or chaos of the front. But now they were watching those machines roll past their broken wagons without stopping. Müller, riding in the back of the GMC, wrote later in his notes, "We believed in craftsmanship. They believed in simplicity. We built for pride. They built for use." As they drove, they saw the results of this difference. American trucks could deliver food and ammo faster than German units could retreat. Roads filled with Allied vehicles, a river of movement, fuel, shells, spare parts, all arriving faster than the Germans could even record. Meanwhile, German soldiers often ate cold soup and stale bread because supplies couldn't reach them in time. A single broken wagon could block a road for hours. Kruger remembered how their officers had once praised German precision. Now it sounded like a curse. "Our machines are too perfect," he said bitterly. "They break if you look at them wrong." Even worse, the German fuel situation was collapsing. Allied bombers had destroyed oil plants and train lines. Horses didn't need fuel, but they needed food that was now disappearing too. It was a losing game either way. The American system, by comparison, worked like a living machine. One factory made engines, another made tires, another made the trucks themselves, all fitting together like parts of a clock. The soldiers driving them didn't have to know how they worked. They only needed to know how to keep them running. When the convoy stopped near a burned village, Kruger climbed down and looked at the horizon. He could hear Allied trucks in the distance, that steady, unstoppable growl. "This is how they win," he said quietly. "They don't fight faster, they move faster." That night, as he fed a tired German horse beside the idling GMC, the difference between the two felt larger than the war itself. One was fading away, the other was just beginning. But there was still more to learn. Soon they would see the full power of those American convoys and understand what true mobility looked like. 2 weeks later, Kruger's captured truck was parked beside a small hill. From there, he could see something that made him speechless: a line of American trucks stretching farther than the eye could see. Engines roared like thunder. Dust filled the air. Dozens, then hundreds, of GMC trucks moved in perfect lines across the French countryside. Each carried fuel, food, or ammunition toward the front. The convoy looked endless, like a metal river flowing east. "What is this?" Müller asked, stunned. Kruger Sip's interpreter, who had lived in America before the war, whispered, "They call it the Red Ball Express." The Red Ball Express was one of the greatest supply operations in history. It started right after D-Day in 1944, when the Allies needed a way to move huge amounts of supplies from the beaches to the fighting front. Every day, more than 6,000 trucks like the GMC CCKW drove in 2 continuous lines, one going to the front, one coming back empty. The roads were marked with big red circles, the red balls, and only convoy trucks could use them. The drivers worked day and night. Many were African-American soldiers who weren't allowed to fight on the front lines. But here they became heroes of movement. They drove through mud, rain, and bombed roads, often with no headlights and no rest. Each day, the Red Ball Express delivered more than 12,000 tons of supplies, enough to feed and fuel entire armies. The system was so fast and so constant that some called it the heartbeat of victory. Kruger watched from a distance as truck after truck passed by, each marked with unit numbers, each loaded to the top. The sound was steady, deep engines humming in rhythm, gears shifting like music. He realized this wasn't chaos. It was choreography. This, he said softly, is how you feed a war that never stops. The German system could never do this. They had relied on trains and horses, both easy to destroy. The Allies had built roads, maps, refueling points, and repair stations that moved with the front. The Red Bull didn't just deliver supplies, it carried momentum itself. When a truck broke down, a repair team arrived within minutes. If a driver got lost, military police guided him back. Fuel depots were placed every 25 miles. Nothing was left to chance. Kruger noted in his report, "It is not only their machines, it is their method. The truck is a soldier, the road is a weapon." He thought about his own unit. In the last month alone, they had lost 6 supply trucks, 3 horses and half their gasoline, all to shortages and air attacks. Meanwhile, the Red Bull kept moving, no matter what. At sunset, the last trucks disappeared beyond the hills, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the echo of engines. Müller exhaled slowly. "It SEP's not just numbers anymore," he said. "It SEP's a moving factory." Kruger nodded. "Factories on wheels," he answered, "and they are rolling straight toward Berlin." The mechanics looked at their captured GMC again. Just one truck out of millions. It was no longer just a machine to them. It was a symbol of how far behind their own country had fallen. But even this realization would grow deeper. Soon after the war, these same men would see the American system up close, not as enemies but as workers in the factories of peace. By spring 1945, the war was almost over. The German front had collapsed. Kruger and his fellow mechanics were captured near the Rhine and sent to a prisoner of war camp in France. It was quiet there, no bombs, no marching orders, just fences, tents, and long days of thinking. One morning, an American officer walked into the camp and called for men who could repair vehicles. Kruger and Müller raised their hands. Within a week, they were taken to a nearby motor pool, a place where captured trucks, tanks, and jeeps were repaired for use. To their surprise, the Americans treated them fairly. The work was hard, but the food was good, and the guards were respectful. The smell of oil and gasoline filled the air again, but this time it meant safety, not fear. Kruger stood beside a line of GMC trucks. Hundreds of them. Some needed engines, others new tires or brakes. The scene felt familiar, almost like his old life before the war, yet now he was fixing the same trucks he had once studied as the enemy. "They still run like new," Müller said, wiping his hands. "Yes," Kruger replied, "they were built to outlast us all." Every day the German prisoners worked beside American soldiers and civilian mechanics. They saw the system from inside, how every truck had a tag, how every tool was logged, how spare parts arrived in perfect order. It was simple, fast, and fair. There was no shouting, no fear, no chaos. In his notebook, Kruger wrote, "This is what real order looks like, not discipline by fear, but by design." The Americans didn't talk much about victory. They talked about getting things done. One sergeant told Kruger, "A truck that doesn't move is as bad as a soldier that doesn't fight. Both have to keep going." The words stayed with him. By the summer of 1945, the war was over. The prisoners were slowly sent home. Kruger returned to a Germany in ruins, factories bombed, roads broken, and horses, once again pulling carts through the rubble. But he couldn't forget what he had seen: the rhythm, the order, the power of a system built on movement and teamwork. Soon, Allied officials began hiring former mechanics to help rebuild Europe. Kruger joined one such group. He worked under American engineers who were part of the new Marshall Plan, sending food, fuel, and trucks to rebuild Germany. For the first time, he saw GMCs not as enemies, but as saviors. They carried flour instead of bullets, coal instead of shells. The same trucks that once fed an army were now feeding a continent. One day, as he repaired a worn-out truck in Hamburg, Kruger smiled faintly. "These machines," he said, "won 2 wars, one with guns, one with kindness." The roar of engines had once meant fear. Now it meant hope. But the greatest lesson wasn't just mechanical. It was moral. The war had shown him that power came not from pride, but from purpose, not from how perfect something looked, but from how many people it could help. And as the first convoys of rebuilding rolled across Europe, he knew one truth more clearly than ever. The future belonged to those who could move, build, and share. In 1947, Germany was still broken. Cities were quiet, except for the sound of rebuilding, hammers, engines, and voices speaking softly in the dust. Among the noise, Kruger worked again as a mechanic. This time, he wasn't fixing military trucks. He was repairing GMCs that carried food, bricks, and medicine under the Marshall Plan. These same American trucks that once rolled through war now carried hope. Their engines echoed through the empty streets, bringing warmth to cold homes and strength to tired hands. Kruger trained young German men who had never known peace. He showed them how to change filters, check oil, and repair engines. "Keep it simple," he told them. "That's the American way." They nodded, learning that good design wasn't about being perfect. It was about being practical. Sometimes at night, Kruger sat by the road and watched long lines of trucks move past, hundreds of them, headlights glowing like stars in the fog. They reminded him of 1944, but now the sight filled him with calm instead of fear. He thought about what the war had taught him. Germany had believed that precision and beauty would win, that perfect machines made by expert hands could overcome anything. But America had believed in something else, making enough for everyone, making things strong, simple, and easy to fix. In his old diary, Kruger wrote, "We designed to impress. They designed to endure." By the 1950s, Germany's factories were running again, but this time, they worked differently. The lessons from Detroit, from the GMC, from those days as prisoners, they all became part of the new Germany. Engineers learned to build cars like the Americans did, fast, efficient, and for everyone. Companies like Volkswagen and Mercedes combined German skill with American simplicity. The result was a miracle, an economy that rose from ruins to become one of the strongest in the world. When Kruger visited a museum in the 1960s, he saw a restored GMC CCKW parked beside an Opel Blitz. The plaque under the GMC read, "Over 560,000 built backbone of the Red Ball Express, symbol of American industrial power." The Opel Seps plaque read, "About 100,000 built, an excellent design limited by production." He smiled quietly. "We built beauty," he whispered, "but they built victory." Years later, in an interview, another German mechanic said it best. "Perfection is the enemy of good enough. We learned too late that wars and nations are won by what keeps moving." That was the final truth of their story. They had come as conquerors but left as students. The trucks they once feared had become their teachers. In the end, America's greatest weapon wasn't its tanks or planes. It was its abundance, the power to build faster, simpler, and for everyone. And for the men who once stood beside that captured GMC on a French road in 1944, it was a lesson that changed not just their war but their world.